I love the fact that he is using a blaster at the same time as using his lightsaber. We absolutely have historical examples of a person using a sword in their right hand, a revolver in their left hand. Hi folks, I'm Matt Easton of Scholar Gladiator. I teach people how to use swords and other historical weapons, and I also give advice to TV and movies. And today we're going to be looking at fighting from Star Wars Jedi Survivor. So I love that he thrust, okay? I've always been a big champion of more thrusts. I know that Palpatine likes to thrust quite a bit. It's great that we see more thrusting with a lightsaber because this is actually a very logical way of using a lightsaber if a lightsaber was a real thing. Obviously, we see lots of thrusting with real swords as well, but I've always felt that the choreography represented in Star Wars with lightsabers is a little bit cut-centric. So blocking, I absolutely love blocking with lightsabers, and it's what makes lightsabers make sense in a Star Wars environment. For swords or a sword-like weapon to make a lot of sense in a world where everybody's got repeating, unlimited ammo firearms, essentially, you have to have something that the sword can do that swords in our real world can't do, and that is blocking the shot. So the fact that we're still extensively seeing lightsabers blocking and bouncing back and sometimes hitting the person who's shot at you, that is exactly what lightsabers must be shown to be doing a lot of, because it's what makes lightsabers make sense in this galaxy. This is a minor detail, but I really like that the default cut is downwards from the right. In the systems I practice, this might be called a fendente or an oberhaupt, and this is absolutely the most common blow that humans and apes give. So if you put a rock in a person's hand, or a stick in a person's hand, or a dagger in a person's hand, most people, if they're right-handed, will strike downwards from the right-hand side, or downwards from the left-hand side if they're left-handed. This is the absolute default thing. I have to admit, I'm not a massive fan of the double-ended option. The reason being that most pole weapons, so staff weapons, things like quarterstaffs and glaives and halberds and things like this, most of them have a long handle, and that gives you all sorts of options for manipulating. You can hold with the hands far apart or close together, you can hold the hands down at the back end, or you can choke them up to the front end. The other thing you've got to remember is when he's using this, there is a massive risk of hitting yourself with the back end. So whenever the front end is going out to hit someone, the back end is coming towards you. The advantage, of course, is you can double up attacks and it's very overwhelming for opponents. The disadvantage, not much handle and quite easy to hit yourself with. I would say though, for a weapon fighting against multiple opponents, it would make perhaps more sense, because by spinning the thing around you can engage more opponents at once. In a multiple opponent scenario, it does maybe make more sense. We see a bit there where Cal Kestis, he moves the two swords around each other. And for anybody who's never tried to, you can just take two sticks and try it at home, okay? Trying to move two weapons around at the same time while not having them get in the way of each other is really challenging. And a lot of people have asked me, they've said, Matt, why wasn't fighting with two swords more common in history? And there's two main reasons. Number one, it's quite difficult to learn, okay? It's quite tricky. It takes a lot of dedication and practice. And for that reason, perhaps we see it in Europe, we see it in the fencing schools. We don't necessarily see it on the battlefield very much. But the other main reason is because carrying two swords or two lightsabers means you can't carry a shield in historical combat. However, in a Star Wars context, remember the lightsaber is also your shield. I really like the way he's moving these lightsabers, and to me, it really seems like they have gone to someone who really knows how to use weapons. I don't know whether it's Asian or European martial arts, or whether they've just watched videos on YouTube like mine and other similar channels, but the way that he's moving the swords really looks good. It really looks like, for example, side sword, paired side swords that we find in the Bolognese tradition from Bologna in mid-16th century fencing treatises. The movement style looks really good. I quite like the way he's moving his feet around as well. He's keeping a slightly low stance, slightly bent knees, ready to move in either direction. So they've got his body positioning right, they've got the movements of the swords right, except I would say it should have a little bit more blocking in it, but apart from that, it does kind of look like real sword fighting. Oh, building your own lightsaber. Who wouldn't love to do that? Ah. The pointed up crossguards remind me of a Scottish sword, a claymore, a two-handed sword. In fact, that style is distinctively Scottish and goes back into the 14th century. Don't have them pointing downwards. You'll hit yourself in the wrist. That's a terrible idea. Whenever you see a fantasy sword with a downward pointing crossguard, I won't say that it was never done historically, because it was, but it's generally speaking not a good idea because it will hit you in the arm there. So Cal's lightsaber now is essentially more akin to a longsword, approaching something like a Montante or a Zweihander. It's not quite that big, but that will affect how you use it. For example, you don't want to hit the ground with your weapon, even if it's a lightsaber, because if your weapon hits the ground, it's going to disrupt its pattern of movement. It's going to stop it, essentially, or divert it. So the way that the sort of paths that you move with a really big two-handed sword is somewhat different to how you would move a katana or a longsword or a bastard sword. So I like the fact that they've changed the patterns of movement in correlation with the fact that he's now got this bigger sword, and it's got a crossguard on it as well, which really is reminiscent of a Montante or Spadone, as we would call it in Spanish or Italian. So Cal's kind of done a schoolboy error, as we'd call it in Britain, and so what he's allowed is two opponents to get either side of him there, which is a really bad idea. Against multiple opponents, what you want to do is try and funnel them into a line, would be the ideal. What you absolutely don't want to do as the single person is allow the attackers to come around you, because then you're just completely in a terrible situation. So I kind of feel when those two people are attacking him at the same time, he actually did a bit too much blocking. I would have advised him to go on all-out offense. Lots of circular motions and keep the blade moving around. Take out the people much, much quicker and force them onto the defensive. The moment that you parry, you give the other person time to hit you. I love the fact that he is using a firearm, a pistol, a blaster at the same time as using his lightsaber. So it just so happens I've got a couple of pistols here. So here we've got a single shot 19th century military pistol. This is a French one. This is the sort of thing that would have been carried in, let's say, the 1820s or 1830s, single shot. And here we've got a mid-19th century British revolver of a type that would have been carried in the Crimean War, for example. We absolutely have historical examples of a person using a sword in their right hand, a revolver in their left hand, being surrounded by 5 opponents and shooting them down, and also in this case parrying incoming attacks with the sword as well. The great thing about lightsaber is it can block. Usually pistols can't block. Pistols are great in attack, rubbish in defense. Lightsabers are great in defense, but you can't reach as far as you can with a pistol.
You dare stand against me?
Wow, okay, so we've got a guy who's an amputee, essentially. He's missing one of his arms. I don't know the backstory to this. I do actually know a couple of people in the world of HEMA, that's historical European martial arts, what I teach, who are amputees. There are lots and lots of sword styles. In fact, most sword styles only use one arm. Not to say the other arm isn't used for some things. It might be used for balance. It might be used for sometimes grabbing and grappling and pushing and things like this, disarms. If you have got one arm, you can learn a whole bunch of historical sword styles without any problem at all. So yeah, good to see. So my opinion of Survivor is that the combat is way better animated, choreographed than we've seen in previous iterations. I really, really love the fact that I strongly suspect that whoever oversaw the combat in this game has actually gone away and done their research. They've looked at probably Japanese, Filipino, and European martial arts, because there are recognizable movement patterns in there and that make sense, that are consistent. Some of the guard positions I think could be improved. I know it's part of Star Wars canon that you have different stances for the different lightsaber styles. Personally, I would tweak the positions that some of the lightsabers are held in some of the time. But overall, I think it looked great.